All right, good to go. So today's session is safely growing your portfolio with emerging franchise brands. And today we're going to be talking about, of course, is emerging franchisors. We are going to take another quick overview of franchising in general. We're going to look at some statistics, some kind of an overview of franchising. We're really going to dive into the kind of nuts and bolts of what we at FranData call an emerging brand. We're going to see what that means to us. But for those that don't know, an emerging brand for FranData is a brand that has less than 5 years in operation and less than 50 units in the United States. So that's the basic framework that we're working on here. We're going to talk about some of the traits of emerging brands, kind of who they are, why they become emerging franchisors, the challenges in underwriting them versus a mature concept. And we're going to go all the way through actually looking at a brand and how to underwrite it when it doesn't have a lot of information. So we'll look at how to kind of draw out some peer brands from the franchise registry. And then we're going to go through a report that we create and is available for lenders to purchase, and that's called an emerging brand report. If you guys are familiar with a report called the Fund Report, this is very similar to that, although it's not a scored report, so you'll see that. And at the end of the session, we'll actually take a quick run through an actual Fund Report as well. So if you're familiar with the report, the Fund Report, and that comes along, if you'd like to drop off, that's fine. But we will review Fund Report again at the end of today. So that's a little bit of an overview of what we're looking at. I do just want to touch on a couple of franchise concepts. We're not going to take a lot of time on them. But again, when we talk about a franchise, what is a franchise with respect to SBA and the Federal Trade Commission? They're basically looking at three basic things: whether they have a trademark, the borrower has a trademark, significant control from the brand, and whether there's a required payment. So when we talk about a franchise and we talk about FTC franchise rule, we're talking about trademark, significant control, and a required payment. I know there are a lot of folks on the call that are dealing with dealer agreements and job agreements and different types of things. Those things do need to be on the SBA directory. I have a bunch of tips in here that we have kind of collated from our submissions to the SBA. We've done over 200 submissions to this process. I'm not going to go through each one of these bullet points, but I just have a couple of them bold-faced that I want to just reiterate. The timelines for posting the directory, SBA has actually been pretty good with this, usually around 2 weeks. Some of the longer ones can take longer if they have specific issues that they need to negotiate with the SBA. I know Red Wing Shoes is one of them this year. Or if they're kind of a license agreement or a dealer agreement or non-franchise agreement, they may have some hiccups that cause it to be a little bit delayed. A couple things I want to clear up, just some questions I've had from lenders. If the franchise brand is listed on that SBA directory as having a negotiated addendum, they can also use that standard addendum, Form 2462, anytime they want. SBA gives them that option. So if you're processing loans and you see that a brand is listed with a negotiated addendum, you can use Form 2462 if you need. And when we talk about a brand that does have a negotiated addendum, the next question I usually get is, hey, Paul, where do we get that document from, right? Where does it come from? Well, it comes from the franchisor, and SBA has said specifically that the document that you get from an approved brand from the franchisor is to be treated as the correct document. And if there's some kind of issue, the franchisor gave you something crazy or it was written on a cocktail napkin or whatever, SBA is going to assume liability for that. So just wanted to lay that out for you as well. And the last tip on this is that the brand does not necessarily need to have an SBA code. The thing with the SBA directory is that they are listing everything under the sun. So they want to see brands that are franchised, that met that FTC franchise rule that we talked about. But they also want to look at those non-franchise agreements, those dealer and those jobbers. They're going to be listed on the directory, but they're also going to be listed as not a franchise. So that's caused some confusion, I know, from lenders already, where if they've seen a brand on there and they're not a franchise, they don't have a franchise code, and the question is kind of where do we go from here? The brand is still approved. They're okay. If they're not a franchise, the SBA, of course, is not going to issue them a franchise code. So just a little housekeeping there on what is a franchise and some issues and tips that we've seen with submissions to the SBA directory. But from what I've seen and heard from lenders and folks, seems to be going okay. But to today's topic, challenges in franchise underwriting. We chatted a little bit about it before, the difference between an emerging brand and a mature brand. But again, an emerging brand for us in FranData is a brand that has less than 50 domestic units open franchising in the U.S. and less than 5 years in operation. You're going to hear me talk a lot about through this presentation about data quality and seasoning in the units and concept stickiness and having a track record in franchising. This is part of the reason why we do not apply a scored metric and a scored methodology to an emerging brand. We really want to make sure that those units that are open on the ground have the seasoning to be able to rate them. In terms of challenges and opportunities, kind of follows with common sense. Mature brands are going to have more data available for you. More often they're going to have P&Ls and information in their item 19. They're going to have high-level franchisor financial information in item 21. Most of the time you're going to have good information. But of course, because they're a larger brand, you might see more competition for deals and perhaps less opportunity for growth in your area. If you're in a state with a franchise that has built up a lot of units, there may not be a lot of opportunity for growth. Maybe there's a transfer opportunity. If you're doing transfer financing, that's another discussion that we can have. But of course, emerging brands, as you might imagine, have much fewer units, much less data available, but often these are the folks that you're going to see coming into your office looking for lender partners to drive growth. These are the brands that want to go from 20 units to 300 units. They have aspirations to be national brands. We're going to talk about the differences between an emerging franchise brand's aspirations and goals versus the actual realities that we're seeing. But it's important to know that a lot of these brands are looking for lenders to drive growth. All this is really pointing towards this idea of data reliability and that we need reliable information to underwrite loans. For the third year in a row, we've done best and worst lists with Forbes, where we've ranked the top franchise brands based on different categories and investment sizes. The reason I pointed to this here is to give a sense of what we did for the methodology with Forbes. When we did this ranking, we focused on several criteria that was important to the Forbes reader. We looked at system sustainability, value for investment, and franchisor support and stability. These were metrics that were important to Forbes. Now the fund report and the emerging brand report is a standard methodology that we've put together. But if there are lenders that are listening on the call and they're thinking, hey, when I'm looking through that fund report, some of these metrics really aren't as important to me, so I'd like to turn volume down on some of those, and maybe I'd like to turn up the volume on things like unit economic information, prospect screening, right? What is the strength of the borrower that's going to be coming in the door? So we can tweak a methodology for a specific institution if you guys have something that you'd like to lend more or less weight to when you sit down with us and you talk to us about higher level research and those types of things that we do for your institution. I wanted to give you some information just about the total landscape of franchising. When I talk to folks about SBA program in general or just lending to franchise brands, what they think of right away, and lenders that think franchising, they think food, right? You think QSR, you think sit-down restaurants. But what's really interesting is that the majority of franchise brands are actually outside of food. We have over 60% of the brands in franchising are not in food. And if you look at the top numbers on the chart there, sure, the first two, as we said, QSR and sit-down restaurants, but there are a lot of sectors outside of food. So if you have someone in your organization, a credit person, just saying, hey, we really hate food. That's why we don't do franchising. My credit underwriter doesn't like to do food deals. Well, there's a ton of opportunity and success happening in franchising in the health and fitness space, in the child-related, child education, and early child development. So there's really a lot of opportunity. So if you have folks that are thinking that franchising is just food, know that there are a lot of brands that are outside of that space. Further, when we think franchising, we often think of the large national brands. We think of these big hulking monsters that are all over the U.S. But in reality, about half of the total brands that we have in our database in franchising are actually local brands, meaning that they are in less than 10 states. And another third of franchise brands are only regional, meaning they're in less than 34 states. So when I talk to folks about franchise lending, they tend to think, hey, this is a big enterprise for large banks that cover nationally. But in reality, there are a lot of franchise brands that are growing locally that are very, very strong. And most of the concepts are not going to become national brands. We'll see in the slides coming up that although emerging franchisors have aspirations to grow nationally, a lot of them don't actually reach that. And in terms of the distribution and franchising based on system size, most of the brands in franchising are going to have less than 25 units, so they're going to fall into that emerging category. Now, when I chat with lenders about doing research projects and portfolio development and building out their lending programs, they say, Paul, I want to be in that slice on the right there that's in dark purple and blue. I want to be in 100 to 500 units in the brands that are 500 units plus. Most of the lenders do. But part of this presentation today is to start to look at maybe some of those emerging brands that are up and coming, understanding how to learn where they've come from, and maybe some of those brands that have kind of aged out of emerging and are really starting to pick up in that kind of 80 to 100 unit range. A brand called Capriati's actually comes to mind when I think about that. A brand that has kind of come through the growing pains of an emerging brand and is now really starting to hit their stride in terms of maturity. Another question I get is, talk to me about the brands that are high performing by industry. I just wanted to include this slide here. This is based on the Fund Score, and you'll take a look at that on the last half of the presentation. Child-related brands are at the top in terms of high performing Fund Scores, and you can see on the top 5, QSR is the 5th. So that's more to the point of franchising encompassing a lot more than just food brands. As you might expect, some of the high-performing brands on Fund Scores are mature because they've had their feet under them. Most of the brands that are 750 or above have been in franchising for an average of 25 years. So in performing franchise brands on the Fund Score, we usually see that those are the more mature brands that have been around for a longer time. And as you might imagine, higher performing brands with higher Fund Scores are growing at an average rate of 6%, which is more than double the growth of other brands. So if you're talking about opportunity and you're talking about being able to push loans, push opportunity and growth in a brand, you're going to look for brands with a higher Fund Score. And as we just said before, they're opening units a lot more quickly versus their peers. Also want to take a look at some of the trends in franchising. It's something that we've really been seeing a lot of. I've been to a lot of conferences this year, and the conversation is around changing tastes in the consumer base. Had this kind of injection of the millennial consumer taste, and we really see this in terms of where the growth has been in the last couple of years in franchising. If you look at the chart here with fast food, you can see that that has really slowed down in terms of the growth in the last 2 years, where we see a huge growth in health general, and other categories like health fast food have either doubled or maintained their growth that we saw from 2012 to 2015. So again, this just goes to the changing taste, what you're going to be seeing coming through your door. You're going to be seeing more of these brands that are kind of fitness related, health related, and also more specialization within subsectors is something we've been seeing. This is a quick chart that just looks at the gym brand sector in franchising. And what this is showing us is that more and more these concepts in exercise are becoming diversified, becoming specialized in terms of a certain exercise. So we might see it's not enough to just have like a Gold's Gym with workout and weights and a treadmill. They're looking for yoga. They're looking for cycle, like Cycle Bar and Soul Cycle and those types of concepts. Real specialization that we're seeing inside of the gym space. So it's really not enough just to be a regular gym brand. Consumers are looking for more specialization in the brands that they look for. So that's an overview of kind of where we are in franchising, some interesting facts about trends to kind of get us warmed up and excited for franchising. Now we're going to take a dive in and look specifically at emerging brands, look at some traits of emerging brands. Who are these emerging franchisors that are starting these concepts and selling units to franchisees that are coming through your door to get financing? We recently did a study with the International Franchise Association looking at emerging brands just to get a sense of what the landscape looked like. And what we found is that over 40% of the brands that we have right now in franchising have actually started in the last 5 years. So we have a large percentage of emerging brands that have kind of come into existence in the last 4 years or so. And those concepts have added 800 locations from 2012 to 2016. So these emerging brands are growing. They're coming in to open units, and these folks that they're putting out in the field are going to be looking for financing. Where are these emerging brands located in terms of sector and industry? The short answer is they're all over the board. There's no specific major industry or sector that's growing. All of the 10 industries that we have in this list have doubled the number of brands in the last 5 years, and everything from food to lodging, personal services, healthcare, child-related, early child education, all of those have seen growth. So we're seeing a ton of growth in emerging franchises from all types of sectors. Where do they come from, right? Where are these emerging brands starting? Most of the emerging brands are actually starting in the western U.S. So you can see based on the chart, we have California and Texas, New Mexico, a lot of these states in the west. Now you can also see in the north and the Midwest as well have some opportunity, and then as well in the southeast. So a lot of these brands do start in the west and in Texas and in the southeast. Now, further, there's about 2% of emerging brands that will originate internationally. And in fact, the brand that we're going to look at today, and we're going to do a bit of a dive on, is an international brand. It's a brand called Burgerim. They actually came internationally from Israel to the United States, started franchising here. So we're going to take a look at that. But it's important to know what those brands are. If you've seen any information in their FDD or whatever you're going to pull, we're going to show you how to get some information on the brands. Oftentimes they have a unique story to tell, and it can be a little bit more challenging to get information on those types of concepts. Who are the founders, right? So who are the folks that are starting these emerging brands? As you may imagine, and it kind of follows logically, most of these emerging franchisors are really true startup small businesses, and that's kind of the way that you have to look at it, right? I mean, a lot of these folks are business owners that own 2, 3, 4 successful locations of a business that they probably started. And now they're looking at growth, and they're looking at different ways to grow their business. And they're starting to see that they maybe can't handle managing another store, 5th location, the 6th location, and maybe someone gave them the idea of maybe you can franchise this business. So a lot of these franchisors are just business owners. 62% don't have any experience with franchising at all prior to taking their brand into a franchise. There are folks out there that help these business owners create their first FDD and their first franchise agreement, so there are some resources out there to help, but a lot of these folks are just running their businesses. They don't have previous franchise experience. And it's usually very localized, right? So founders are starting these businesses with spouses, with business partners. Think of it as a small business, right? And we mentioned before, but this is the number, 60% considered other methods of growth, organic growth, other forms of distribution. Hasn't worked out. But they've chosen the franchise model because of the opportunities that they feel it will give them for faster expansion. They've not necessarily made this change in the franchising because it gives them some kind of internal benefit or their internal operations run more smoothly. It's purely a growth and an expansion decision. And here's the point that I kind of hinted at in the early slides, is that 72% of these new franchise brands plan to grow their brand into a national or international presence within the next 5 years. Okay. Now, when we look back and we saw what the percentage of total brands right now are that were national brands, it was like, what, 16% or 18% are national brands. So we have 72% of new franchisees are going to go national within 5 years. So at this point, as when I say, well, how many of these folks do you think are actually going to get there? Probably not many are going to be national within 5 years. So we need to, when we're looking at these emerging brands and we're examining them, try to understand where they're coming from, what their goals are. I mean, if they think they're going to be a national brand, do they actually have a structure in place to get there? Do they have a plan? Do they have folks in-house to be able to build that kind of a business up? So those are the kind of questions that we'll be asking. Looking at performance over time, the misconception with emerging brands and sometimes owners, but kind of the public in general, is that the race to victory for an emerging brand is the brand that opens the most units the fastest, right? Figure, hey, that's what we judge ourselves on is royalty revenues and open units. So naturally, the brand that opens the quickest is going to do the best. But in reality, emerging brands only open an average of 1.3 franchise units in their first year, increasing to 4.5 units in their second year, and incrementally to 8 franchise units a year in their 5th year. So this is not a story of a brand that's going to come into existence and open 100 units in the first year. Most of the time, emerging brands are going to open 1 unit. They're going to get their feet under them. Then that second year is going to start to kick up. They're going to have a couple more units open. And then they're going to start to realize what they need and what they don't need. And we're going to talk about that right here, right? So opening the business is only one part of it. They have to keep those franchisees and the business successfully operating, and that becomes the challenge for an emerging brand as they start to add on units. What we found, and this of course makes sense, is that as these new systems start to add units on continually after year, we start to see that their continuity rates start to decline. Okay, so what that tells us is that those businesses, those franchises that have opened in those first couple of years are not actually staying open throughout their first 5 years. And that's really super important. We don't want to see closed units in the first year, 2, 3, 4 of franchising an emerging brand. So really, really bad sign for our concept. And this is another point about growth, right? So these brands want to be emerging brands, but you're going to have sufficient resources and systems in place. We talked about that a little bit, but the advertising program, site selection support, training programs in place, sourcing equipment and ingredients and things like that. All of those things kind of need to be taken into account. Now, we also looked at unit growth and success by initial investment size, right? What's the success of these brands based on the total investment needed to start up? Is this, a micro franchise where we can get in for $50,000 all in, or, is this a larger build out where we're talking $500,000, $600,000 to get into to start up? Basically what we've seen is that the continuity rates are higher over time for emerging brands with a larger initial investment size, right? We think in part this is because businesses with lower initial investments can be easy to walk away from, and they often have limited assets and low inventory. As well, the larger brands, the brands that have or have a larger initial investment size, are often going to have larger net worth and liquidity requirements for their franchisees, right? That bar that the franchisee has to jump over financially. They're going to be a stronger borrower on the whole, and we've seen that emerging concepts with a higher initial investment size do tend to do better in terms of the continuity rate over time. So let's just recap some of the characteristics of an emerging franchisor. So a future franchisor, what does that look like? He or she is an entrepreneur or a small business owner, and they run their business with a spouse or a business partner. Not really complicated. Pretty much what you think of when you think of a small business or an entrepreneur. They've been in business for over 7 years. They have no franchising experience. They have a couple of corporate-owned units and a few employees, and don't really have a ton of other experience in the other things that you might expect. Real estate, training, other franchise experience, not really there. They have a successful small business that's got a couple of units and they want to go into franchising. That is generally what we see in the characteristics of a business owner that wants to become a franchise and emerging brand. Okay. Now, once they become an emerging franchisor, what's a typical new franchisor look like? Well, they're doing a lot of the franchise-related activities in-house, right? They're not using brokers. They're not using training people. They're really just getting this off the ground. So they're selling their franchises in-house. They're offering franchise training in-house. Maybe they have one person for franchise sales, and it might even be the founder or the owner who's super juiced about the idea and is just going out to trade shows and selling people on this. Training, there's usually no dedicated training person that runs training. They might say, hey, we need to train the general manager for the new first franchise location. Okay, so they grab their general manager off the line from their high-performing company-owned unit, and they bring him in for training, and that person handles training. So really not kind of organized on the company level at all at that point, but like we talked about before, right, very high expectations. They're going to be an international or national franchise within 5 years, so that's where they're going. Look out. But in reality, a lot of these concepts are actually using their own capital to fund these franchise businesses, so not really planned out in terms of the financial needs of the company and the brand going forward. And then after 5 years, you think that a lot of this stuff is taken care of, but not really. After 5 years, a lot of these franchisors are still struggling to manage the corporate-owned stores versus their franchise locations, right? We like to see, for an emerging brand, we like to see that they have at least one company-owned location, usually more than that, so that they can respond to market changes, try out things like new menus and new design and decor. And we also find that they're able to prove the concept on the ground. They're realizing that they may have an issue between the cultural alignment of the brand and their initial franchisees, and starting to take a step back and understand, okay, maybe the folks that we signed up early on in the process weren't the best fit for our brand. And this happens a lot. I talk to a lot of franchisors, and a story that I hear very, very often from franchisors that are right around that 50, 60, 70 unit mark, where they're becoming mature and they are now ready to be rated with a fund score. And they may be losing points in their historical unit success rate or something like that, and I'll ask the CEO, I'll say, hey, tell me what happened here. We're doing a rating on your brand. We saw some units close in previous years, but your continuity rate since then is really strong. And invariably the answer is that this brand got too excited, too drunk on the initial franchise fee, meaning they were rocking and rolling. People were buying franchises. They're taking in 40 grand here, 40 grand there, and thinking, wow, this is great. And then when the dust settles, they realize that maybe some of those franchisees that they signed up really weren't the best fit for their system culturally, really weren't driving revenues as much as they should, and so those were underperforming units versus the rest of the system. And management had a difficult decision to make to either terminate franchise agreements, not renew those agreements, and do certain things that showed up negatively in an FDD. But from a business standpoint, they were actually strengthening the franchise system. So it's a story that I hear a lot for brands that are going from emerging and now into mature, but it's something that you guys want to look out for if you're going to be financing these emerging units. And some of the functions, again, that we had talked about that they were trying to figure out, like recruitment and real estate sourcing, things like that, are now starting to outsource those to other suppliers like brokers and other folks and training officials that can do this type of work for them, and that they don't have to actually go out and hire someone. Now, as we take this out to 10, 15 years of a franchisor is when they start to have dedicated folks for training and VPs of franchise development and that type of thing, and they start to build out an infrastructure on a corporate level to support the brand. All right, that's an overview of emerging brands. I want to dive in now to an actual case example to examine what we can do when we have a franchise brand that does not disclose a lot of information, doesn't put as much information in the documents as we would hope. So we are looking right now at a brand called Burger-M. Now, if you pull the FDD from the franchise registry, and we're actually going to take a look through a newer FDD. This is the FDD that we looked at that we had from the year end of 2016. We now have their 17 and their 18 information. So we're going to take a look at some interesting things that we found in their FDD. But this is available for the ability to access a disclosure document is available for everyone here on the franchise registry. Now we're looking at some advanced searches here. That's going to be available for our subscribers. So some of this stuff you may have to do manually in terms of comparing these brands if you don't have the benefit of the advanced search. So basically what we want to do in building out a list of peer brands is just take some information about the concept and then search it against the franchise registry. So when we look at FDD for Burger-M, we're like, okay, there's not a lot of financials here. I see we have franchise agreements signed. We have 83 agreements signed and lots of projected units. Not a lot of information. So the goal here is to build out a group of peer brands of Burger-M and then go into those disclosure documents and do some comparisons, right? Compare things like minimum net worth and liquidity requirements of the borrower. Compare things like the support for my franchisee, site selection support, grand opening support, support for distressed units if there's an issue. They might send in a jump team for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever to right the ship. Those are the kind of things we're looking for. So what we want to do to build the peer brand is just take some very simple information. We've identified, and you can see in the bold area, the advanced search. Just identify the sector and industry, the QSR brand, and Hamburger Traditional. We're also going to include Hamburger's drive-through in that search as well. And the initial investment level for this brand starts at $200K. So just putting in those three parameters into the advanced search on franchise registry, searching for QSR, Hamburger, and Hamburger drive-through, and an initial investment of $200K, we've built out this list that I have on the left of potential peer brands for Burger-M. Now, immediately we want to eliminate any mature brands that are in this group. So Culver's, Five Guys, Burger King, Carl's Jr., Hardee's, Jack in the Box, McDonald's, Rally's, you're all gone. Okay? And now what we're left with here is a list of peer brands for Burger-M. From here, we can now search these concepts on the franchise registry, pull their franchise disclosure documents, and now start to take a look. Hey, how does Burger-M stand up against America's Dog and Burger, which is actually a hot dog and burger franchise that started in Chicago and has been really fast growing in the last couple of years. They're actually really great. So if you've never heard of America's Dog and Burger, grab their FDD. I would recommend you take a look at them. So this is the type of thing that you would do and go in and try to draw some comparisons, and then this is giving you fodder for questions to ask potentially of the franchisor, right? So you've got your borrower that comes in like, hey, I want to do Burger-M. Okay, that's great. Well, get yourself on the franchise registry, get the contact information for the VP of Franchise Development or whoever's working with the brand, and then you can give them a call to either to ask some questions about what isn't in the FDD or perhaps to confirm certain bits of information that might be in your borrower's business plan. How does this hold up against other units that you may have seen open for Burger Inn and really help you ask those questions. So that's what you can do. And I want to actually take a look at the disclosure document for Burger Inn because we found some really interesting things in there. And I just wanted to show everyone what really can be found just by going into the FDDs. Now, we do all this work for you in the report that we're going to show you after this called the Emerging Brand Report. But if you want to dig through all these disclosure documents and do that, you may never know what you may find. There's a lot of info in here. So what I put on the screen is a balance sheet that we took from the disclosure document from Burger Inn in 2017. Now the example there was from 2016. They didn't have any financials, but in 2017 they filed a late FDD. They filed an FDD in early December. And normally most franchise brands will file around April, May, around that time. So they filed an FDD in late December, and from what we gather and what we can glean from this, it looks like someone put a P&L in there that they printed up and accidentally included in this FDD. The first thing that we found in this balance sheet is a Porsche Cayenne. We actually found that the brand had taken a loan out for a 2013 Porsche, and you can see right here that the franchisor still owes $58,000, $55,000 on this vehicle. So that was very revealing to see that. And so that immediately was like, wow, okay, what's going on here? That's something that we've never seen on a balance sheet for a franchisor company car that's actually a Porsche. If we look in the 2018 FDD, you're going to see it's not itemized. The number is still there under long-term liabilities and notes payable under a vehicle loan, but they don't actually itemize it as a Porsche for obvious reasons. It's an eye popper. But further, reading in the disclosure document, and this is the type of thing you guys want to do, right? You want to ask, where's the money coming from with these franchise brands, right? Especially an emerging brand. So even if you pulled up an FDD and they had nothing in item 19, no unit economic information, there's nothing that tells me what's going on with the units on the ground, okay. Well, what about the franchisor? Are they taking in any money? Well, let's look at the FDD here and see what we saw for the income of this brand at the end of the year 2017. What it's telling us is that this brand took in $18.2 million in initial franchise fees. That's a huge number. This brand, I think the initial fee is like $40,000. So they've taken a whole heck of a lot of initial fees from franchisees. Further, we find a line item that says franchise fee refunds in the amount of $2.786 million, meaning the brand gave back initial franchise fees in the amount of $2.8 million. They've refunded that. That is unheard of in franchising. That is not, we don't see that. If you look at franchise agreements, you look at any of these agreements, the initial franchise fee is earned the second that the franchisee writes the check to the franchisor. So we don't want to see franchise fee refunds in this. But the other thing that's really telling is what we don't see. What we don't see in this P&L or this the profit loss for Burger Inn here are any royalty fees, royalty incomes, meaning income that we have from units that are open and paying us royalties back. Nothing. So we have $18.2 million in initial franchise fees. We gave back $2.8 million of that. We have no royalty income at all. And we had $14.3 million in expenses on that amount of money. So this is a picture. This is a very dangerous picture because we have a brand that has built up $14 million in expenses on a system that has no royalty income. Now, you guys can all do, we have another item here about they took a $1.2 million distribution to shareholders. I don't have a screenshot of that, but that is also very, very troubling as well. When a brand takes a distribution to shareholders in the early stages of their emerging life. In the first 2 or 3 years, there should not be that amount of money going out to shareholders. That's money that should be invested back into the franchise system. And so, you know, what we're seeing here is a brand that has a lot of expenses, does not have the royalty revenue to cover them. So in a metric that we talk about called recurring revenue self-sufficiency, they score a 0. They do not have that there. And what we also can do is we can kind of reverse engineer this in a way and ask ourselves, okay, if we have a system that has a 5% royalty rate across the board and has $14 million in expenses, well, what is the size of that system in terms of sales that we need to have at a 5% royalty to be able to pay for our current ongoing expenses that we have? The answer is that they need a system the size of 5 guys to be able to support that type of expense. So as you can see, this brand doesn't have it, but there's information there that can kind of allow you to read the tea leaves and understand what's going on. Now, we have an emerging brand report on this. We dug very deeply on this. There's a lot of stuff in here that I didn't get to. They had a line item of about $200K to an accounting firm on this disclosure document, and we did some digging, and we found that the firm was actually owned by the franchise owner of this brand. So he was paying some firm that do his accounting, and it turned out that he owned the firm, and there's a lot going on. So the moral of this is dig and dig and dig. If there's no information, you see there's nothing there, dig in that FDD, go into M21, dig into the financials of the brand, and just ask yourself, where's the money coming from? What's going on with this franchise? But as I hinted at, of course, if you guys don't want to dig into all those FDDs, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of investigation. We have an awesome research team here that just lives to dig up dirt, lives to find what's going on with these emerging brands especially. We have an emerging brand credit report. Now, this is a little bit of a contrast to the fund report like I mentioned earlier, in that there is not a score associated with this brand, right? We don't want to look at a brand like Bergrim and say, oh wow, they have 80 units open for a year, and that's 100% continuity rate, and then in 2 years half of those units are closed, and now they have a 0 in continuity rate, and you're looking at FranData saying, hey, why did you rate them so well? We did a couple loans to that concept. We're not going to go on a limb and do a fund score for a brand that isn't mature. But what we do in an emerging brand report is really bring everything together that we can without scoring this brand. So we look at what's important here in terms of best practice competencies in executive leadership, what are the support options and support activities, and we also are benchmarking this against their peers, right? So this isn't in a vacuum. This is against best practices in the industry and franchising in general. What's the management experience like? Have the folks from this brand done franchising before? We mentioned before that a lot of the time these emerging brands do not have experience in franchising. So we're going to let you know about that. But there are instances where there is experience and the brands are backed by mature franchise concepts. And I'll actually give you an example of that. There's a brand that we just sent out, actually maybe about 2 months ago now that I'm thinking about it. We have a monthly new concept report at FranData that lenders can subscribe to, and it gets you an email of all the new brands that we've created in a month. And about 2 months ago, we created a new funds number for a brand called the Red Collection. And what the Red Collection is actually the upscale brand version of Red Roof Inn. Right? So most people are familiar with Red Roof Inn, very successful brand in lodging. They're actually launching an upscale concept, and it's called the Red Collection. So when you go in the franchise disclosure document, you're not going to see any units open. We don't have any information yet. Franchisor information, you're going to get franchisor information for Red Roof Inn, but the management team has experience in Red Roof Inn. They have a ton of experience in franchising, and it's backed by the experience of Red Roof. So you have that comfort level with that brand that you may be more willing to go ahead and finance some of those initial units of the Red Collection. So example of where you might see an emerging brand that's backed by a larger franchise operation. When we look at system structure, what we mean is what's the mix of single unit owners to multi-unit owners, right? And there can often be an implied strength there from a brand that has a certain percentage of units that are multi-unit operators. We do see a lot of systems sometimes are predominantly single unit, but we like to see some multi-unit owners in there. It just provides for a stronger system. It provides opportunities for resale of your units and purchases by larger multi-unit operators, provides a more fertile market, we think, overall. For growth and the unit that your borrower is going to be getting into. Talk about proof of concept stickiness. This is about that. It really revolves around those company-owned units, right? Do they have a couple company-owned units? Have they proved the concept? If it's a regional brand, are they trying to expand into a region of the country that they haven't proven, or are they going locally and they understand the towns and the cities and the demographics that they're in? And looking at their concept consistency, have they changed their menus and their things up a lot, and they're trying to hit the mark and they don't really know what they're doing, or are they really comfortable with the structure they have in place and they're moving forward and growing the brand as they have it? We're looking at green space analysis. We're looking at where the brand is, and we're looking at their growth plans to see where they're trying to go with their franchise plans in the future. We're also looking at their peers. So in this case, we looked at OsteoStrong and we looked at other specialized concepts. So when you think of OsteoStrong, again, this is more to the point of exercise specialization, as an example from the beginning, not just exercise. We're going OsteoStrong. This is an exercise concept that's based more on older folks and keeping healthy bones and things like that. We're able to compare it and benchmark it against other brands like Orange Theory, Studio Bar, which is that bar concept, to kind of give you a sense of what's happening. So that's what we do when we look at the green space analysis. And we also look at economic information such as that it's there. Now, we talked about recurring revenue self-sufficiency. I would say that that's the most important thing to look at when you look at an emerging concept. Understanding what their current expense level is, and that's another thing that you can benchmark to against those other brands. We do it in the emerging brand report, but if it's as easy as just pulling up 2 FDDs and looking at, okay, this brand's expense level at 20 units was X, and this brand has, 100 units and has, less expenses or whatever. You can very much compare the 2 concepts, understand what they're doing. But in terms of recurring revenue, we want to make sure that, again, they have enough income with their royalty streams to pay their recurring revenue, or is this a concept that has to sell a bunch of new franchisees, collect those initial franchise fees just to stay solvent? You want to be wary of that. Now, there's going to be a little bit of that, of course, when a brand ramps up. But when that brand's at 5, 10, 15 units, we should be seeing recurring revenue self-sufficiency or close. And again, we're going to tell you what the royalty level is required to achieve that if they don't already have it. All right, a couple of takeaways on emerging brands. We are going to look at the fund report after this. But evaluating new franchisors, risk can be higher. A lot of times it is. Don't expect a ton of support from the franchise brand in the early going. We want to evaluate the skill mix between franchisee and franchisor, right, and the executive experience, right? Where are we with this? If it's one of those new emerging concepts that doesn't have a lot of experience in franchising, okay, we need to account for that. If it's a brand like the Right Collection, well, maybe we're a little bit more comfortable. Cultural combination between franchisee and franchisor, that can be kind of tough if there's just a couple units. But I would say continue to question that franchisor. Ask questions if you see closed units, if you see anything like that. Ask them what their screening process is, what their net worth and liquidity, where they're getting their franchisees. Are they getting them from trade shows? Do they just throw some stuff out on the internet and respond to the inquiries? Do they have brokers? What are they really looking at? Are there any kind of factors that they might look at? And again, like I said before, look at where the franchisor's money is coming from. Right? Get in that FDD, get into item 21, okay, and just look at the top line income. You want to see some royalty income. Yeah, you want to see initial franchise fees and all that, but you want to see royalty income, and especially if you're looking back. Now, the one great thing about going into the item 21, the FDDs, is that they will often give you the previous years in item 21. Now, you're not going to necessarily see that in item 19 and a lot of other areas of the FDD. If it's a 2018 FDD, you're getting 2018 information. But a lot of times, you can go in the 2018 FDD and you look at item 21, and they're going to show you the numbers for 17, 16, and 15. And you go in 17, you're going to see 16, 15, and 14. So you can do a couple things with that. You can just make sure that the numbers are carried through, that there haven't been any changes. If you look at a 27 FDD and the number that they reported for income in 2016 is different than the same year they reported in the next year's FDD, that's a question you might want to ask. Further, and this was the case with Burger, just look to see who's preparing the tax information. If you looked at the returns, if you looked at the financials for this brand, you would have found that they switched their CPA every single year since 2015, I think it was. Where just one person prepares it the first year, the next year it's another preparer, the next year it's another preparer. That's something you want to pay attention to as well. And then we talked about looking at peer brands. We always do that in the emerging brand report, but if you're just diving into FDDs and you want to do it on your own, build out a possibility of some emerging brands that are peer brands. Then maybe look at 1 or 2 mature concepts that have been there and have come out of emerging, and try to evaluate and compare those brands based on that. All right, we're going to take a look at fund scores really briefly here. We just have a couple slides left, and I'm not going to take too much time on all these different categories. Some of them we've talked about already when we looked at emerging brands. But again, just to put a little bow on this before we go forward, the emerging brand report and the fund report are two separate reports. The fund report is done on emerging concepts, so more than 5 years in operation, more than 50 years in the U.S., and it's very much like a FICO score. So you and I have a FICO score. We rate these franchise brands based on real financial information we get from research, we get from surveys, we get from disclosures that we talked about, all these different factors that we're bringing in. So the fund score is out of 950 points. Now, in terms of what a kind of a prime credit is for fund, we looked at the slides before that talked about performing brands are right around 750 and above. What a prime score means to you and your institution is going to be different for each bank, depending upon, of course, your credit box and kind of your appetite and what you're looking to do. But we can certainly help you understand what the fund report means to you by appending scores to your portfolio. So when you're on board with us as a subscriber to the fund report, we're going to append all of our fund scores to your entire portfolio. We're going to score your whole portfolio. We're going to help you understand where some successes were, where some failures were, and what really a prime fund score means to your institution. It's going to help you engage with the report a lot better. So this is, again, now in contrast to the emerging brand report. The first category we look at is historical unit success rate. We compound that rate. So what that means is that we're not just looking at, hey, at the beginning of the year you had 90 units and at the end of the year you had 100 units. So, oh, yay, we grew by 10 units. Well, no, we want to know how many units you opened in that period, right? So if you opened 20 units, but at the end of the year you only grew by 10, well, that means that you closed 10 units in the interim period, and we're going to have to bring that in to this. John asks, was it called Funds score? No, it's always called Fund, F-U-N-D. And it may be confused with our FRUNS number, F-R-U-N-S, which is our franchise unique numbering system. The FRUNS number is the number that we use to code and catalog all these franchise brands. And I mentioned the new concept report that we put out every month for lenders to subscribe to. It tells you about all the new brands. What we also do with that FRUNS number is track changes in the names of existing franchise concepts. So you might, and I don't have a great example here right now, but you might have done a bunch of loans to a franchisor and they decide to change their name next year. Well, if that new named franchisor has a franchisee and comes in and wants a loan, you may think, oh wow, I'm dealing with a new brand. But in fact, you're dealing with the same brand with the same financials and the same management system. So we append a FRUNS number to every franchise brand, and we use that to track changes to the system, as well as let you know when new brands are available. So actually, great question though on FRUNS number. Further with the fund, we get really deep into the financials. We look at resale activity level, right? We want to make sure that it's not too high or too low. We want to make sure that there's a healthy market for a resale of the units for your potential franchisees. We do look at unit economic information and financials. We look at average unit revenue growth and unit economics as a whole for the brand. For these unit economic categories, we want to just reiterate that we're talking about quality of information and quality of the unit economics that drive the score. And all of these are benchmarks. So this is not in a vacuum. When we look at this brand, Christian Brothers, we're looking at automotive concepts and benchmarking them. In historical unit success rate, we do look at the brands in a similar industry and in franchising in general. So actually, I'll just pop back so you can see that just for a second. When we look at this compounded success rate, the quintiles here are across all of franchising. So when we do this, some of these are against all franchising. Some of them are industry specific. And then from there, we look at the brand on a franchisor level. So what's really important there is franchisor-franchisee relationship. Right? Are we suing our franchisees? Are franchisees suing us? Do we have issues with that? Most of the time we don't, but if there's anything in the FDD, we want to make sure we pull that up. Recurring revenue self-sufficiency, we talked about that with the emerging brand report. But again, what is this brand relying on? We're relying on selling new units, or are we relying on our existing franchisees to pay their bills as well? Further, we're looking at system support and expense commitment. So those are some of the things that we talked about in the emerging brand report, right? Do we have site selection support? Do we have support for distressed units and all that? But with a fund report, we'll go a little bit deeper and say, okay, now that we have all these financials, what's the actual commitment level here? We have all these great programs, but how much money are we throwing at it? And what's that percentage of expense based upon our income level. Is it a healthy enough level? I'd like to see a good percentage of development expenses versus other expenses and things coming in, so we're making sure that we're supporting the brand. Wasn't really the case in some of the ones in the examples that we looked at today with that emerging concept with Bergrim. Similarly to the emerging report, we do look at management experience and stability. Prospect screening is a really interesting one. And this kind of speaks to what we talked about on the first slide or the second slide there when we talked about the Forbes rating and how we tweak the methodology a little bit for them. This is an area where sometimes lenders want to turn up the volume a little bit in terms of prospect screening when they're weighting brands and saying, hey, what's the quality of the borrower that's going to come in through the door once I decide to do a lending program to this franchise, right? Is the bar high enough that these people are going to be bankable and the loans are actually going to get through? Or is the bar to get into Christian Brothers just so low that even though we like the brand and the concept's doing well, the prospects that are coming in, we just can't get them financed. So that's something that when we talk about portfolio development with lenders, sometimes they want to turn up the volume a little bit on prospect screening and maybe balance that against some other things. Further, we will look at the franchise agreement assessment, and this is not an assessment of SBA eligibility. I know a lot of folks are familiar with work we've done in the past with SBA on eligibility. This is not an eligibility question. This is a question of, are there any issues in this agreement, any language that are going to affect my deal from a credit perspective, right? Do I get exclusive territory rights? Is there a requirement for sourcing my goods from a sole proprietor? Are there excessive transfer fees or liquidated damages, right? So if my borrower wants to sell, are there excessive fees to transfer this license to someone else, to the buyer? Or are there liquidated damages in the event that this borrower goes out of business or walks away? Am I going to have a huge bill for future royalties that aren't paid? And I'm going to be standing behind that in terms of being able to get paid back from a lending perspective. So we're going to look at all these different factors from a credit risk perspective, so you're not going to have to actually dig and dive through all those franchise agreements and actually read those as well. And then we're going to project forward. So based on everything that we've looked at, based on the numbers that are in historical unit success, the unit economic information, surveys that we may have done with franchisees, we're going to project forward. And this is where some of the other kind of tilt factors, if you will come into our analysis. So for example, we just completed recently a fund report for Papa John's. In the projected unit success rate, they take a little bit of a hit, and we cite specifically the two issues that they've had in the past 12 months, both over the NFL and their losing of the sponsorship, the pizza sponsor of the NFL, and some of the more recent issues that the founder has had with his kind of issues on the conference call and kind of the fight that's been very public and that we're seeing happening there. So all those types of factors and what we call a kind of tilt factor is going to be baked into the pie in projected unit success rate. So all of it's out of 950. I would love to chat with you guys about that fund report and the emerging brand report. There are some folks on the call I know that are already using them today, so that's great. If there's any other questions you have, if you're thinking about, hey, I'd love to leverage that information in a different way, or if your institution does not yet have access to that fund report, please give me a call and we can certainly get you signed up. Wanted to wrap up quickly with just a quick reminder of what the difference is between our website, the Franchise Registry, and the SBA Franchise Directory. They are two distinct sites, although I can assist you guys if you have issues with each. We're here to help with both. Basically, that SBA Directory is going to tell you if you can do the loan, right? Is it eligible for SBA? Franchise Registry is really going to tell you if you should do the loan, right? And that's going to help you do a lot of things. Get on the Franchise Registry. We're going to help you evaluate the credit risks. There's actually great contact information, so you guys as lenders are using the Franchise Registry. But we also have franchisors that sign up for a yearly subscription to be verified on our site, which means that they are putting their most recent disclosure up for you. They've put contact information for their relevant folks in the organization. VPs of franchise development, finance people, everyone that you need to both underwrite a brand and from a biz dev standpoint to actually build relationships with a concept. And for the brands that are mature, we actually create the fund report and sit down with them and have a consultation. So we let them know. We say, hey, this is where you're strong. This is where you're weak in your fund report. Here's what lenders are looking for. Maybe you should disclose more information or do this or do that. Be aware of these types of things because this is what you're being rated on, and lenders are lending based on this information. So when you see a brand that's on Franchise Registry that has a membership, you know they're verified because we've put them through this process. We've educated them on what they need to improve on. You're going to have a more savvy franchisor partner, and you're going to have a better experience in making these loans. So that's the final piece on Franchise Registry Verified and what that means. And with that, that is everything that I wanted to communicate to you guys today. So I hope that it was informative and helpful. I'm going to take a look at some questions. Oh, we just have one, and it looks like we answered it. So if you guys have any questions at all, I'll hang on for a minute. But my email address, telephone number are there if you guys, I know a lot of you guys know how to reach me. But if you have any other questions or anything that you want to bring offline or specific issues that you're having with a brand, we can do that. Okay, another question here. Does FranData ever visit corporate offices and meet the staff of a franchisor? We do. This is something that we do a lot. And we do it in a couple different ways. Of course, we're always having meetings with franchisors. We will often have them come visit us in our office. I think I had this over here. Who did we have in? We had Tariq Farid in last Thursday, who's the creator of Edible Arrangements. And he visited us for a lunch last week. So we do have chats like that, but also part of our bank credit report process. Now that wasn't mentioned on this webinar. We talked about the fund report. We talked about the emerging brand report. These are tools that we create and lenders purchase to underwrite a franchise brand. There's also a report called a bank credit report, which is an analysis that's paid for by franchisors and created with confidential financials that we get from the brand. Now you can imagine that there's not a whole lot of those. We like to say that there's a natural selection process with the BCR, right? So the brands that are stronger, the brands that are desirous of having that enhanced see-through in their financials for lenders, they're the ones that are creating BCRs. So there's about maybe 10 to 15% of our universe of 3,000 brands that have a BCR. Part of that process includes a site visit where we send an analyst down to corporate. We sit with the team. We do a request for information. We actually collect the financials. We do site visits to a couple of units. So we get a really, really deep sense of how the brand is performing, how they're looking to grow, and where they've been in the past and where they're going. So it's actually a really important part of our business, and our analysts get out on the road a lot to kind of get in with franchisors. And that really drives a lot of the insights that we bring to this process, right? So I mean, we do underwriting, we help you do those different things, and it's great. But where we really shine as well is helping you build the biz dev side of things and the different insights that we can bring to you about how a franchisor actually runs the business and grows, right? Is this a franchise brand that's kind of a top-down franchise where the VP of Franchise Development runs everything and they're bringing in prospects and feeding those prospects down through to lenders? Or is it more of a bottom-up system where there are larger multi-unit franchisees that are operating, and the way to get into that system is to make some loans to a multi-unit operator and then be recommended up through the system. Those are the types of insights that we bring when we talk to lenders about how best to approach a franchisor, and that can often be the best way to build a relationship because you're having deals flow from the franchisor, the franchisees, and having a lower reliance on brokers and that type of thing. So really exciting. Question about, we mentioned that we can subscribe to see upcoming franchises. Where do I subscribe to that? That is it's called the New Concept Report, and I will make sure that we send out information on that to everyone on the call. The New Concept Report is a report that comes out regularly and informs you of two things: name changes in franchise brands, so any brands that may have changed names or changed LLC or whatever name, and new concepts to franchising. So that's where you would have found out about the Red Collection and some of these other brands. Anytime we identify a new concept, and we're constantly scouring, IFA and the state exchanges and having calls with franchisors, anytime we see a new FED or a new brand and issue a front number, it's going to show up on that. So I'll send you some information, Sheila. I know we chatted a lot about different things. So if anyone does have interest in that New Concept Report, email me or Melinda. and we can certainly help you out. Another question, how many brands are there in the U.S. and how many have you analyzed? Melinda is going to bop me over the head because I don't know exactly how many brands. I'd say it's over 3,000 for sure, and we've analyzed every single one of those. In terms of fund reports, we have right now on file, I think the number is like 680 fund reports that we update on a yearly basis as soon as the new info is out. But we can do new reports in about 3 to 5 business days. So if you have a brand that you want to get a fund report on a brand, we don't have one already created, we can just put it into production, do it for you, no big deal. Same thing with the emerging brand reports as well. 3 to 5 business days we can create those. Price, both of them are $500 a report. So emerging brand report, 500, fund report, 500, same thing. That's that. We do have, as I mentioned before and hinted at, very, very exciting bundled and subscription options for the fund report. And really what you're getting with that, yes, you're getting the fund reports, you're getting them at a discounted rate, but you're really on the team in terms of being top of mind for referrals, the type of intelligence about franchise brands that we talk about, and really just having a resource to be able to call up and say, hey Paul, what are your feelings on this brand? We supply a report, and then we can talk to you about how the brand might be operating and how best to approach it. So that is everything. I think that's all the questions I have. So I want to thank everyone again for spending a little time with me. We're just right about at 3 o'clock, so I think it's a good time to stop. Again, if you guys have any questions, you want to talk about anything else, there's my email address. My telephone number here is 703-740-4715. And you are all super resourceful, so I'm sure you can find that number and give me a call. Thanks. You guys have a great day.